Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Cam Good Times. It's good to be with you. And today I wanted to give a little review on this here skate setup, my Them 909 boot with Wizard Advanced frames. I saw So-So Rollerblading doing an edit with this setup with the Ritters, and it was amazing. I highly recommend you guys check out his channel, and it inspired me to try it out myself and just see what it felt like, and this was a fun setup. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what it feels like in my experience in comparison to the Seba SX with full Wizard setup, and give a little bit of tips and ideas that might be helpful, hopefully, as you're trying to figure out your own Wizard setup. So first, I'll start off with fitting. Now, the first thing for anyone doing this is you really need to make sure you have some good waxed laces. That gives you some good heel lock. That also gives a lot more stability because this is definitely a flexi boot, and it's meant to be flexi because it's really made for awesome grinding and park skating times, and the flex is nice because it makes it a lot easier to really lock in those grinds and things. It does make it a little more challenging when using a Wizard skate, but it works pretty well still, surprisingly, especially when you have an Intuition liner. I think eventually I'll want to try my Wizard Intuitions in here, but the Intuition V2 was quite good. Anyways, even though it has a softer tongue, I still had pretty good control. So some tips on this, though, is that you want to make sure that if you are going to be using a Them boot, that your foot can fill it in really well. If it's too loose, like if you're in the category of people who can't fit the small shell like I do, but then there's the medium shell is way too big, it might not work very well for you if you tried that in a Wizard setup. But in my case, I have 26.5 centimeter feet, and so I really fit nice and snug into these small Intuition V2s and the small 909 shell. And so that really made it possible for me. That made it a lot easier for me to have good control over this. If it was bigger, I don't know if it would work out as well. So the second part I'm going to talk about today is support. Overall, like I said earlier, this is a flexi boot, so it will feel, if you're used to a carbon boot or a really supportive boot for your Wizard stuff, this will feel pretty loose. However, if you're coming into Wizarding from the standpoint of using an FR1 or another plastic boot or a power slide boot or something like that with a Trinity type Wizard frame, anything like that, it's a good likelihood that this actually will feel pretty decent. It feels pretty similar to what a 165 mount plastic boot felt like for me with an Intuition liner. Pretty similar to the FR1. A little more flexy, but still pretty fun. And I would say, though, the main disadvantage of this with these specific frames is that even though this would work fantastic, I can see why Wizard and Them put together the collaboration of their PR80, PR76 Wizard frames with these, because it works perfectly with that size wheel. So really with this frame, it works quite well with the regular tricks like lions and gazelles and things. The only area where it's not as good and is a bit more challenging is trying to do toe rolls. I was able to do heel rolls great, as you may have seen in my last edit, but the toe rolls are a bit more tricky. Now, it's totally doable. I saw the guy in So-So Rollerblading doing it wonderfully, but it probably would take a bit more practice than it would just using the carbons, which really just is super solid and sturdy and locks in easier. Still good, though. Still works, and just a bit more of a challenge. So it really depends on your preference. If you feel okay with that give, then it works out. I personally thought it was kind of fun having a little bit of the flex because it gave a little more leeway for easier carves and things. For me, I think because I'd strengthened my calf muscles from using the FR1s for a long time, I think this still felt fairly natural to me, and it really wasn't too bad for me to hold hold into my carves and have a nice good angle. The only issue though is because this is a bit more flexy, it is a little harder to control your slides. So there were some times that as I've been practicing on these, I was sliding out a little more easily. It was a little harder to have a precise angle, especially if you're doing a parallel slide or something like that. So overall, the support is still really good. You can still do most of the moves that you would need to in wizarding and other stuff. Also great support for jumps because, well, these are really made for doing jumps and big tricks. And so all in all, still pretty good. The third part I want to talk about is responsiveness. This area was probably the most notable difference for me from the Wizard carbon, and that is because this is squishy and flexy. It just, when you're pivoting, especially when you're really doing a hard pivot, if you're kind of straight up and down and trying to just go from front to fakie really fast or something like that, it just isn't quite as fast of a response, and it is a little sloppier. It's still doable, it still works, and you can still do amazing stuff, but I didn't like that as much. And I guess when you're in the full wizard setup, it really spoils you. You get used to just having instantaneous movement, and this definitely had a little delay and was a little less precise. Not a huge issue, but something to consider as well. And then for comfort, I think this was incredibly comfortable because of how flexy this boot is, and because the Intuition liner is just amazing in this particular boot. I think I would love to try the premium liner at some point. It might be a little too tight in this specific shell for me, but I just hear it's a great liner. And anyways, it really felt cozy, able to move around a lot. And I think that's the point too, is that when it's more comfortable, it tends to be a little less energy transfer, a little less power in movement. But if you're having a good time playing around, jumping off of things, it's still just fine. It's great. So good comfort overall. And finally, style. I do love how this looks. I just like all the funky colors of the Them Brain Dead boot. And I just love how the 909 looks in general. It's just a very simple, sleek design. And I thought that looked pretty cool with the nice shiny wizards underneath of it. So it was nice to cruise around in. I think it looked pleasing. It was nice to had a good look down factor, as Joey McGarry calls it, I think, look down, something like that. But it looks great. I love flying around in these. It was fun to see them in the edit. And yeah, so I think these are pretty nice overall. It's a good option for a wizard setup. The one thing I would say, and this is my last section, is just the recommendations, is that I would not go any higher than an 80 or possibly 90 millimeter. Yeah, you could. I think you can get away with a 90 millimeter or like a PR90, sorry, an NR90 frame with these at the most. If you go any higher, the flex of this boot would just be too much, and I think it would be pretty unstable. I've seen people do it though. They got to have pretty incredibly strong ankles and incredible talent to do this, but I have seen people go bigger. But if you're just wanting to get into this setup, it might be a bit too difficult and maybe a little too squirrely. And so I would say going with this kind of setup would be really nice. I would say though that because it's not as clean or not as controllable when it comes to a lot of the stuff that the Wizard Advanced frames were meant for, I think it would be much better going with the carbon boot or even the Seba CJ plastic boots. Those would be fantastic with this because of how solid and sturdy those are. However, this is still doable, and it still is a lot of fun. And so it's still an expensive boot, just like the Sebas are, but maybe a little less expensive. If you're considering maybe a slightly more budget-friendly option, this might be it. Or if you already have some Them skates, it would be really good to use these for getting into wizarding. There's just a lot of possibilities there still, and this is just a very solid, good boot all around. So that is my review. I hope it was helpful to any of you who were curious, and I really enjoyed cruising around in these. I think I might try these off and on here because it just gives a little bit of flavor. And it's nice that you have this sole plate here, so if you want to just lock onto a ledge and just add a little bit more dynamic funkiness to your wizardry, then that works too. So keep at it, everybody. Keep on being awesome, and everybody have a great day.